in general, not necessarily related to the nonprofit sector, but just in a lot of our drilling down with the detail, that really the most of the revenue that we expect to collect is from our very large businesses. So really, you're talking a couple hundred businesses throughout the city, and raising the threshold, let's say from $250,000 to $500,000, doesn't really reduce our expected revenue a whole lot, because those are really smaller scale businesses. When you're looking at $250,000, $500,000, and $750,000, those aren't the businesses generating the large dollar amounts. So one of the things that not only the city, but council has been very vocal in is protecting the small businesses. So my assumption is that when we go through some of our scenarios with the council, that they are going to make a decision that really protects the smaller businesses. So not to speak for them tonight, but I get the feeling that we're looking at exploring higher threshold amounts. So probably at a minimum $500,000, maybe even higher, $750,000. And what do the different rates across different industries really mean for our revenue opportunities? And we don't want to we don't want to overly tax burden the businesses that do fall under the B&O threshold, So we are trying to generate just what we need in the general fund, which is about a $4 to $6 million gap annually. And playing with the numbers, again, it's really hard at this point because we don't know all the businesses that will have Nexus in Auburn, but we are expecting probably we are able to levy up to a 0.2% B&O tax, and that we aren't even looking at even half of that rate for Auburn. That wouldn't be, we're not looking at a revenue gap that would require us to set a rate that high. But there's also options where you can tier rates by industry, whether or not you're wholesaling or whether you're retailing. Just knowing that retailing activity tends to, let's say, have smaller margins, so maybe adjusting the tax rate so it's lower on those types of businesses. When it comes to nonprofits, there aren't a whole lot of exemptions. And if you look at other cities, nonprofit doesn't necessarily have a whole lot of exemptions. Daycares, tuition, rehab facilities and kinds of services, those are types of activities that tend to be exempt for nonprofits. But really it has to do with, again, taxable revenue. So not knowing what a lot of your businesses are, it would be helpful for us to know what kind of business you're doing, if you think that you would be falling into the reporting threshold, and what are some of your concerns and some things that you would like us and the council to take into consideration when we're crafting our code. So are there certain deductions and exemptions that you think that we should be considering when we are crafting our code? But without knowing specifically the types of services that you provide and the types of revenue that you generate, we're only guessing when we're building the code. That said, I expect that there will be several versions of the code even after the council adopts the first version. As we get to know more businesses and we roll this out to businesses, there's always exceptions to the rule. And so there's always going to be questions and clarifications along the road. So although we want to get as much information now and collect that information from you now so we can be proactive and get that built into the code now, that doesn't mean it's going to be the final version of the code and that there isn't room for amendments later and clarifications later down the road. So I know that's really kind of vague. That wasn't very specific to the nonprofit sector. So if you have any specific questions, I will try my best to answer them. But for the most part, we don't have a code. We have a model ordinance, and we have, of course, templates from other cities, but we don't have anything nonprofit specific built into our template yet for Auburn.
Casey, can I jump in?
Of course you can, George.
Thank you. So I think defining revenue is going to be pretty critical here. So I think all of us may have revenue derived directly from donors. Probably all of us do. Certainly there's going to be, some of us are going to have revenue derived from fee for service. And there could be government grants, cetera, et cetera. So this is not an uncomplicated question. I mean, if you're just saying gross revenues, we have responsibilities to donors, we have responsibilities to the federal government, we have responsibilities to our contractors that need to be respected as well. So you can look at our, look at our gross income and go, well, look at that foundation, Greenwood College Foundation is doing great. We're going to tax, go and tax on your gross receipts. I've got to be able to go back and figure out, okay, how I'm going to make that work, because frankly, every dollar that you're taking out in taxes is going to be $1 less or more that's going to be providing services to folks who desperately need them, period. There's going to be, and that's that will be a message I'd be happy to share within my constituencies, and we have no way to pass this along. I'm not going to be passing along, it means one less dollar to a student scholarship, or I'm not able to put dollars, to keep students on campus. So, I mean, I can't pass it along. I have no one to pass along an increase in anything to. So it means, other businesses have that opportunity to do so. And I have an MBA, so I understand that profit margins right now are tight for everybody. And I think the nonprofit sector right now, from parts of our business are I mean, we're struggling to do things right now. It's not easy. We're trying to figure out how to make things work with a lot less money coming in than we're used to, and we're we're tightening our belt or getting real creative out there. So obviously we want to be part of the solution. I've been a big supporter of what goes on in the city, and also a huge beneficiary of what goes on in the city as well. I live in the cities. I live in Auburn. Pretty invested in our community and don't want to see it fail. That's not my point, but I also think we need to be realistic about, if you're squeezing the nonprofit sector, you're basically squeezing constituents who don't have anything, who are pretty vulnerable as it stands right now. So that's my 2 cents. And again, I'm happy, let's talk about this, try and figure it out. And we also, pretty critical to come back to a second meeting like this with some hard numbers. The presentation is so vague at this point right now. I don't know if this is an existential threat or not. I don't know how big the bite is going to be. So it'd be helpful to have that information. I've said enough at this point. So thank you for your attention. Appreciate it.
Thank you, George, for those comments. I would just kind of to elaborate on that. I think that it's important. I understand that you're saying that it might not impact some nonprofits here because we might not have that huge threshold that you guys are looking to invoke on the business community. However, our big donors in the nonprofit area are those businesses that are going to get hit by those taxes. What that does is it actually takes out of the pockets of our nonprofits, because a lot of the time that's where that extra money comes from. And our nonprofits are who help our community, who are doing those human services like feeding homeless people or helping shelter homeless people or providing resources to people that might be drug addicted or providing job opportunities to those that have struggled in those areas. So when our larger businesses get hit, our nonprofits get hit. And we're seeing that right now with the shutdown and the decrease in some of our businesses. That's hurting us. They don't even know if they can help us right now because they're trying to help themselves. And so if this is an added thing, that's my concern. I understand that you don't think that it might not impact the nonprofits if we don't make over $500,000 in gross income, but it will impact us if our businesses in the community that support us financially get hit with it. I would love it if there are some other nonprofits that might be able to provide some information and feedback, as George did. Yes. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Nancy. I'm the business director for Health Point here in Auburn. Some of my questions and concerns are very similar to George's, because a lot of our funds come from the same, as he was mentioning, donors and grants. I mean, we get city grants, state grants, fund grants, but a lot of our income per se is also coming from Medicaid and Medicare, which are, federally funded for us as Health Point, as a community health center. So we would like, as George mentioned, is what part of the income threshold is actually going to be considered as revenue? Are we going to take that type of information as revenue? Besides Medicaid, Medicare, and then self-pay, there's not a whole lot of third-party payers that we generate revenue from. So it's like we're going to be, if everything goes through, we're going to be taxed on the money that the city and state gives us.
So just to clarify, that grants and donations don't typically fall under the definition of engaging in business. So those would not count towards your gross revenues earned. Although they are income sources for operating, they aren't part of that calculation. So I'm taking all of these notes as far as the types of revenue sources that you have concerns over, that's the taxability of, and making sure that those are the types of revenue sources that are addressed in our code.
Okay, thanks.
This is Karen Williams, Executive Director at Trillium Employment Services. And first of all, thanks for hosting this. This is really helpful. And I'm grateful that you're allowing the opportunity for us to contribute ideas. So obviously Auburn is not alone in being a local jurisdiction that's being hit, and probably will see a greater decrease in support from the state as the state figures out its budget. So similar to the other comments that were made, a large portion of Trillium Employment Services income is fee-for-service contracts with the state, which is a Medicaid match. Anyway, I don't know how you would calculate that as revenue, in that it's not in the grant or fundraising or donation category that you listed earlier. But it seems like maybe circular reasoning, like one of those, when you have an Excel spreadsheet and it keeps going looping, because that is from the state coffers. And so we are probably going to get a reduction in our reimbursements with projected cuts. So I'm not sure this is the best approach. And maybe could we have nonprofits rather join the city in coming up with other strategies to fill those gaps, or trying other, we're not the only jurisdiction going through this. So how could we partner with the city to come up with some solutions to fill that gap?
And I think that that's where this meeting today is very beneficial to the city and the council. So we can really be thinking about, where does this B&O code, who is it impacting, and not wanting to impact, and being very intentional with our code and making sure it's not impacting critical services that nonprofits provide to the city of Auburn. Again, we not only do we want to protect small business, but we want to be making sure that we're protecting the services that are critical to Auburn too. So I think, again, the more information we have about the very specific fees, I would be interested to know a little bit more about not necessarily in this meeting, but maybe even in an email or a follow-up conversation about the fees for services that you collect from the state for services, and determining, is that more of a grant-based, because again, those wouldn't be applied to they wouldn't apply towards that threshold amount. So making sure that if it is truly a fee for service, how do we capture those types of fees, and making sure that we build exemptions into the code for specific kinds of services.
And I know you didn't want to go into detail necessarily now, but I'll just say that ours does not count as a grant in that it is, I think, a straight up fee for service. We're a nonprofit and we're providing a service that the state otherwise would have to provide. I don't know how you would differentiate us from a construction company that's getting paid fee for service to build a bridge. So I don't know how you define that in code, but I'll just say ours is not considered a grant. It's a
Okay.
reimbursement for a service we provided.
And what services are those?
Employment services to people with developmental disabilities.
Okay. So how we would, is as an example, how we would build it into the code is an exemption. So we could identify the types of services or the charges for services that you collect. If it's for certain activities, and those activities become then exempt in the calculation. So and I think I've seen in different codes, there's something similar. So I want to make sure that we are similar exemption language, but I think, again, making sure that our code is specific to Auburn and the nonprofits that serve Auburn, and making sure that we identify very specifically those services that we want to make sure that we exempt. And I would have to go back and look at other codes, but I do know that it is again, along the same vein, maybe not the exact same service that you provide, but certain employment services and job training is a common deduction or exemption from the code.
And what about all the arts organizations? I'm thinking of organizations like Auburn Symphony and other. I just don't know, where it would end. How you would have the list complete.
Aren't cultural organizations like totally exempt? Does anyone know?
Not necessarily. Again, that is one of the areas that cities have the ability to build those exemptions into their code or not. And if that is something that we want to make sure that we're building into our code, we can. I mean,
okay, I'm sorry. I must be mistaken. I thought that was an RCW.
Not that I know of. I know that it's probably a common deduction, and maybe it goes back to a specific RCW. It's a good question.
I'm happy to, love to sit down with anyone and really talk about, income sources in the nonprofit sector. I think there may be a sense that, how hard could it be? It couldn't be that complex. And I've worked for the YMCA for 23 years before I came to work for the Green River College Foundation. And the sources and how nonprofits cobble things together are amazingly complex. They have to be, because we're doing things that are difficult to fund, frankly, and there's no margin. Unless at the end of the day, there's enough margin generally to cover your indirect expenses, but there's not a lot of margin beyond that. And anything that any margin that does get generated gets socked right back into the business. It's not coming out. It's not going into an owner's pocket. I mean, it's just a different model when you think about it. There's who's the owner. Businesses exist to increase owner value, right? So that is the classic definition of what a business does. Well, my owners are the stakeholders who are providing service to, and I don't budget for a margin that goes into anyone's pocket. If there's any margin, again, it goes back into the pocket of the students we serve, or it creates better services going down the road. So I mean, it's just an entirely different model. Maybe some of my colleagues here, budget different than we do, but we budget to zero, and it's the direct expense and the indirect expenses Whoever we owe folks, there's nothing left over. On a good year, it's nice to have some extra money, but we budget to zero, and we're pretty darn close to that every year because I have a responsibility to give that money back and put it back, invest it back into the community. So so my MBA is trying to wrap my head around how to explain the business model and the differences in the business model. I understand both very well, both the for-profit and the nonprofit business models. And it's just they're entirely different kettles of fish.
I was trying to think about, our own money here and what would look like revenue. And the only thing I could really come up with is maybe our 2 events that we put on and invite people out to. However, I never charge for those. And I don't put a dollar value on it. Every dime that comes through is because somebody decided they could afford $20 or $2,000. So, if you're looking at that, and that whole event is directly related to the expense of the event, which is, for instance, our harvest breakfast pays for all the food that we need for Thanksgiving and Christmas in order to be able to give all of our families, a holiday meal. So, and it's usually really close to being right on, never a ton of profit in there. So I can't even find a revenue stream for us that doesn't look like that. And no grant is ever going to let us pull money out for an extra, a tax or, a fee of some kind. I can't pay for a grant writer out of my grants. That has to somehow come out of, general fund money. So I mean, obviously George has said it well. We are all struggling with, there's a turnip here that doesn't have anything left.
If I can jump in on the arts side, I can give you an idea of kind of what our business model is. I mean, 20, 30 years ago, I can speak to orchestras specifically. I'm the executive director of Auburn Symphony. 20 to 30 years ago, orchestras, 60 to 70% of their budget could be covered by ticket sales. And, the other third was made up of grants, individual donations. And in the last 20, 30 years, that has actually flipped, where, if a good orchestra can cover, about 30% of their operating costs with ticket sales. So if you're talking about earned versus, contributed income here, we don't have that much to tax to begin with. And, we're hoping post-pandemic to grow ticket sales all the time, obviously. But I mean, if there's not that much there to begin with. And as George said, we budget to zero. We budget to pay our musicians, pay the facilities, pay our staff, and there's not much left over after that. And it's already becoming harder to do that because ticket sales are covering, our earned revenue is covering less and less all the time. So yeah, that would be, if we ever got to a point where, we did meet that threshold to be taxed, that would just be another hurdle.
This is Mark Putnam with the YMCA of Greater Seattle. I run the Social Impact Center, recently merged with Nexus Youth and Families. And I missed the first few minutes, apologize, and I'm appreciating everyone's comments. Could a couple questions get answered for me? What are the intended uses of the tax revenue? And then what is the threshold that's being proposed?
So the uses, and we've done, I do have a presentation that I had provided to the chamber a few weeks ago. It's just for the general fund, essentially. So we have a systemic imbalance in our revenues and our expenditures. All businesses and nonprofits, our expenditures have continued to grow, outpace our revenue growth. We're restricted to really 2 primary sources of revenue in our general fund, and those are restricted. We don't have any control over that revenue growth. And it grows at approximately 1.5% to 2% per year, our revenues, and our expenditures, because most of our costs are people, outpace that revenue growth. And so over time, it's just eating away that more quickly growing expenditures eats away at our fund balance, and it's not sustainable long term. And so we are trying to find ways, and we have actually identified several different ways, not just the B&O tax, several different ways to really kind of help supplement the general fund so we can maintain the same level of services that we've been providing. And then there was a second part to that question as well.
There was discussion of a threshold, like a certain amount of revenue, I think, or a size of organization or something.
Sure. So again, this kind of goes back to playing with the rates and the thresholds and who are we protecting as far as business and services in the city. I think the number that we've been playing with the most is a $500,000 is a $500,000 gross revenue threshold. That doesn't necessarily remove or eliminate the possibility of raising that threshold anymore. I'm not sure that there is much of a need to make that threshold any lower. I mentioned earlier that those are really the smaller business. Those smaller businesses don't generate a lot of revenue. I guess it's not that it's insignificant to the business, but it overall doesn't contribute that much to the city. And so if it's anything that they can save to make their business sustainable, but it's not providing that much of a benefit to the city, we'd rather keep those thresholds higher, protect those businesses, and approach it that way. So we're looking at a higher threshold, at least $500,000.
I apologize for joining late. I was having connection problems. I'm Sandy Almas. I'm the finance director at New Day Church and Valley Christian School. We have 138 students, and we're meeting in person, and our enrollment has gone up significantly during this COVID because parents want their kids in school. And so I really apologize. I missed the whole preamble and so on. Would it apply to churches? Would it apply to our school, which is under our same tax ID number? And I just wanted to get my name and organization on the We Were Here list.
So typically with not necessarily tuition for schools, but for daycare services provided by churches and organizations, by church and religious organizations, those are almost always exempt from the B&O tax. Again, tuition for actually grade school, middle school, high school is not something that is typically exempt, but it again doesn't mean that it can't be written into our code.
So I think I kind of hear that you have an ask, but at the same time, you have a heart and are trying to figure out if we can give you enough reasons to write in exemptions. You got 18 people sitting here that would love to give you, I think we have given you all of those little reasons. So I'm hoping that that's heard, that's understood, and we're more than happy to share some of our budgets with you to show you where the income's coming from, what would be called by the business world income, and help to explain that out to the for-profit world, because like Georgia said, there's a vast difference in that. I tell people all the time, if you're a businessman and you drive by the food bank and you see that line going around the building, you're going to wonder what I did right, not understanding there's something wrong. So.
Well, and our parents that bring their kids to Valley Christian School, they're already paying the taxes that go to the local public schools. And now they're also sacrificing of what's left of their income to pay to have their students, some of them We don't require a religious faith. We don't require that anybody is a member of a Christian church of any sort. We're one of the few Christian schools that exist that don't have that requirement. So we have Muslims, we have Buddhists, we have anybody who wants to bring their kid and is not offended and will support what they know will be some of the teaching that their kids will get. And to add a tax onto that, and just for us, seems like, you know, we're already paying for a school system we're not benefiting from, and now we're paying for another because we haven't been able to find a way to get any kind of voucher system in place that will give us the ability to utilize the already paid in tax revenue.
I think the easiest way to think about this for council members and for city staff, every dollar you take out of the nonprofit world means $1 less in services. It's a 1-to-1 equation. There's, you know, again, we're balancing to zero. We don't have a way to pass it through to a consumer. It just simply means that, you know, overhead costs beyond a certain point are tough to shrink. And so the places you have that are controllable are the number of bodies or number of people you can provide services to. And then beyond a certain point, then the nonprofit ceases to exist because you can't cover your direct and indirect costs. But that's it. I mean, it doesn't get any more or less complicated than that. Doesn't mean we don't want to be part of the solution or that we're not sympathetic. I mean, we do and we are. But again, it just really comes down to there's no pass through, and it just means less services for the vulnerable people in our community.
It's okay. I just make a quick comment for everybody's benefit. And George, I really appreciate your input and what you're saying here. We can't speak on behalf of the council because we're not a council of one, we're a council of 7. So we can't talk on pending legislation. However, what I can say is that this discussion the council is having goes back to about 2 years ago when this started, when former Director Shelley Coleman brought the information to the council about the potential deficit we would face going out in future years. And Director Thomas has reinforced that, if you will, with the picture that she's painted related to where we're going to be out in 2023, 24, 25, and 26, which is not a good picture at all. And as Director Thomas mentioned, when you look at the cap we have, for example, on property taxes, property tax cap is 1% per year. And if you look at the total revenue that brings into the city, I guess, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jamie, but that's less than $250,000 a year. So when you start looking at those numbers and looking at the increases in what employee costs are, so our revenues are increasing 1 to 1.5% a year, and our expenses are increasing 3 to 5% a year. So this council is faced with the dilemma, if you will, how we address that. Back in March, before COVID really took its toll, we had a preliminary budget retreat for 2 days. And Jamie was laying out for us at that time some potential scenarios, which included a potential B&O tax that we would have for the city. And we are one of the few cities that do not currently have a B&O tax. Now, with that said, council has begun to look at the various options as being presented by Director Thomas. And as we go forward, I know we will look at additional options before we get to the point where an ordinance comes forward to council. And that would include additional study sessions where more information will be presented to council, more options. And as Jamie mentioned, what she and her staff and the mayor would look at for potential exemptions to the B&O tax. And Debbie, I thank you for saying that, we know this is business, but we also have a heart, and we're all in this together. We understand this can be painful for everybody, including council, to make a decision like this. And I can just rest assure you that this council has the best interests of everybody in the city in mind. And that's how we approach our business. I've said it many, many times with our current council. I couldn't be more proud to be serving on the diverse council we currently have, and the approach we all take individually and collectively to solve the problems and to address the issues. And just as we go forward, please keep in mind that this council not only takes this particular issue seriously, but we will do everything we can related to uncovering all the information, looking at all the data, looking at all the options, all the opportunities before we make a decision. And it's not going to be sometime soon, as you mentioned earlier. It's going to be sometime probably early in 2021 before we get to that point, and then a time period to roll it out after that if we approve it. But it is going to be a challenge for council, but one I know that we're up to the challenge, and we rely upon staff and Jamie to provide us all that information. So George, as you mentioned, anything that can be provided to Jamie that helps council make a decision is greatly appreciated. And I fully understand the process of nonprofits not having a bottom line profit, and all your reserves are reinvested back into programs and people. And we understand that. And we want to thank everybody for their input, their comments, because listening tonight helps us tremendously in our decision-making process.
Claude, I want to thank you so much for that. We do really appreciate our council. One, we appreciate the opportunity, I think, from a business community to be able to just sit at the table with you guys. It's a unique situation. One of the reasons why we set these Zoom calls up is because we don't get to have those town halls or other opportunities. And because this is something that has quickly been kind of introduced to me at the chamber in the sense of this is going to move forward in front of council. We wanted to make sure that we had the opportunity, even if all of the exemptions and the ordinance weren't put together, had that opportunity so that you guys could hear the feedback from our businesses when you are putting together that draft, so that it is ahead of the game for you guys. We want to be sitting at the table with you guys as well, because we know that we want to have a great community that we don't only work in, but also that we live in, we play in, we have, and our businesses make a huge impact. Our nonprofits make a huge impact. And from the chamber's perspective, we will be collecting information from not only these calls, but any businesses that provide feedback. We will break those down into sectors and then provide those to the council, to Jamie, so that you guys have that information in front of you when this is put together. I really, truly want to be able to make sure that you guys get to hear the voice of the business community as your constituents as well. And I hope that we can provide that for you guys. And I hope that everybody that's on this call, please feel free to email me any comments. Like I said, I will be compiling it. We have these calls going for every sector until I think the 15th. And once I get those all compiled, then I will provide those back so that we can make sure that you have all of the feedback in your guys' hands when you have to make these decisions that are hard, and we know that.
I just want to say from my perspective, and thank you, Deputy Mayor DeCourcy, for the words you said, because it's something that's a little difficult for us right now, and getting all the input from Jamie has been wonderful. And now meeting with you folks, it's something that we needed also to hear from you folks, because I know, like Mr. DeCourcy said, this has been mentioned to us about 2 years ago. And it's something that we have kind of not wanted to look at, but with the way our finances is right now, is something that we need to look at something to make sure that our general funds are taking care of our city and also our businesses. But just thank you for all of your input. And Debbie, you know that this new council that we have, this is the best council that we have had, so much that every single one of us have got the biggest heart. And to look at all these things that we have to look at, it comes from us. I'm speaking from me because I know my heart, I think about our constituents and our business first. But thank you for putting this together and bringing us together. And we always want to work together with the Chamber of Commerce. Thank you.
Thank you, Yolanda. I really appreciate that. And I do know that you guys have a big heart, and I do as well, for our business community and especially our nonprofits who serve our community so well. We are so blessed and lucky. Does anyone else have any other comments that they wanted to provide before we end this call?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a couple of things. I mean, I really appreciate everyone's being here tonight. It's really helpful to hear from you all. I was board chair of a nonprofit in Seattle for a number of years, and certainly understand the challenges and the mission, that you all are doing. So I'm grateful for you all being here. One of the things that I certainly ran on last year, and one of the things that I know our council is committed to is making sure that what happens is equitable, that we bring equity and into the discussion. And that's an important principle that I'm sure we'll carry forward as this discussion continues. So I just want to thank you all again for being here.
Can I just say, this is Roxanne. I'm with Pacific Ballroom Dance. You can always look at our 990s. We all have to file a 990, all of us. So I, encourage you to look at those and just see where we are financially. That might be good insight for you.
Yeah, you can go on GuideStar, get a free account, and you can look at all of our 990s. They're all posted there. You take a look at it. I'm happy to drop by with our audited financials. I mean, obviously 990 is one way of looking at finances, and then I can look at, I'm happy to share our audit as well. We chuck those onto our website after they're complete. So no secrets. So happy to share.
Claude, you made a comment that we're one of the last of the cities to turn around and do this. And I think that's a badge of honor that we need to continue.
Hopefully. I'll see. Oh, and just, I know not from my province, but I will be participating in all these sessions except one. I have a prior commitment with one, but I'll be on all these Zoom meetings.
Well, thank you all for coming. I appreciate all of the nonprofits that showed up here. This is one of those things where we all believe this isn't going to affect us because we are nonprofits and taxes usually don't affect us. So this was definitely something that, I had to convince people we needed to listen to because this one possibly could. So thank you for coming out.
Yes,
You're
thank
welcome.
you so much. Thank you, everybody, and providing the comments. We truly appreciate the fact that we get to work together with our nonprofits. We're a nonprofit as well. And during this time, it's been a real struggle for us. And I know that it's been really, really tough during this unusual time. And so please, regardless of if it's just even about the B&O tax, but if it's something else, if we need to put our brains together, figuring out ways that we can help each other, please feel free to reach out to me at any time, whether you're a member or not. So I appreciate everybody attending this call today. So thank you. And again, my email address is on the website, and you're more than welcome to email me at any time. Good afternoon, everyone.